Welcome to Promote, Profit, Publish. I'm your host, Juliet Clark, and kind of have a little bit different guest today. We're gonna chat about something that is an unexpected pleasure from the podcasting world. But before we get there, I want to remind you to go over to our YouTube channel and follow us, like us over on YouTube, Superbrand Publishing. Also, you're listening to the podcast, so please leave us a review. Only if it's good, though. And of course, it's good. And also, don't forget to take our Promote, Profit, Publish quiz. You can find it at www.promoteprofitpublishquiz.com and find out if you're really ready to jump out there and publish, because you need that audience and you need some other skills to build up. So today's guest is Chris Ippolito. And Chris has had an entrepreneurial spirit for a long time. He started his first business when he was 13 years old, selling candy and soda to kids at school. So that's actually really good because you can go buy a case of Coke and sell it cheaper than those machines. So over the years, he's dabbled here and there, but he's never really made a full commitment to this. When his son was born, that all changed, and he finally had the elusive reason for doing this all, which was of course, his why. So now he's building a media company, and his podcast, the GetCoached Podcast, is where anyone can follow his journey. His guests, professional coaches, and successful entrepreneurs share actionable advice to help him and other entrepreneurs level up with whatever they need most. So welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Juliet.
So I'm sort of excited today to talk about this because there are some unexpected benefits that I've derived from podcasting, and I think that you can share some of those because you've interviewed over 50 entrepreneurs now. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been quite the journey, lot of lessons learned. And like you said, even going into it, there was a lot of things that I was not expecting to benefit, but then ended up benefiting, and just going into it wasn't even thinking about that.
Yeah, that's sort of, so when I started my podcast, mine has a blog attached to it, and I wanted easier content. So that was sort of my why. I wanted content to distribute in different ways. But one of those unexpected things was the people that I reached out to have on. So lots of conversations with people that I probably wouldn't have talked to before. How about you?
Yeah, exact same thing. The whole podcast, the idea behind the podcast when I first started was actually to use it as almost a kind of like a lead magnet. So the idea being, I wanted to work with business coaches to do digital marketing services. So what could I do to get in front of them and have their guards kind of be down a little bit, thinking like, I'm not just here to pitch you and sell you. I'm here to add value, build a relationship, and, just see if there's a good connection for us to potentially work together. So that was the initial concept behind the Get Coached podcast. Was I can reach out now to a business coach, my ideal client when I first started this all, and ask them if they would want to be a guest on a platform that I'm creating. Well, as maybe some people might know this, some people might not, but when you have something to offer like that, a platform, people are a lot more receptive to hearing from you and conversing with you and giving you time, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever it is. And I saw positive results instantly. It was crazy. I was like, holy moly, like, I've been in business development in my career for a long, long time, and I had never found a simpler way of getting in front of my ideal client than asking them if they wanted to be on a podcast with me. It was crazy. So that was one of the biggest lessons learned out of the gate, is that the podcast is a fantastic platform to connect with people that you want to connect with.
That is very true. But I find and you and I found each other on LinkedIn. I find when I reach out I talk to a lot of other people, and it's always interesting. They're not great podcast guests. They won't be. It's just not my niche, not my, I try to create value clients on here, or value interviews on here. But one of the things I found is I get to talk to a lot of podcasters about why that topic? And
right.
and I'm sort of blown away too by the topics people come up with, the niche audiences. It's like, really? There's an audience for that? And they're like, oh yeah, we have 100,000 downloads. And it's like, you're kidding. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of things like that too that I find out, just really great niches people are doing.
Yeah, for sure. It's the same when I'm sure if you dig deep enough on the internet for blogs, you'll find some pretty obscure blogs on niches that you're kind of like, really? There's an audience for that? But that's the whole lessons learned from that I've learned from a lot of the guests and successful entrepreneurs is that when you're looking to start any sort of business, regardless of how you're kind of starting it, whether it's like through a podcast, a blog, video content, whatever it is really go and niche down almost to the point where you're like, this seems almost too obscure. But the idea being there's 7 billion people in the world. You're not the only person who's interested in whatever it is that you have a passion around. Mm-hmm. So you start something, and that's the whole power behind the internet, is that you've now got a means to be able to reach those. Maybe it is only 10,000 people in the entire world who care about that niche that you're planning on starting a podcast on, or whatever it be. But if they can find you, well, you've got an audience, and an audience of 10,000. I think a lot of us would agree that would be an amazing audience to have, as far as like loyal fans who are going to buy whatever it is that you're ultimately creating, whether it's a product or service. So that's why the niche thing is so cool, but it's also very counterintuitive to what you would hear from the average person when they're like, I'm going to start a business. Oh, okay. Well, who are you going to help out? Who are you going to serve? Who's your target audience? Everybody. Yeah. I want everybody to buy my product. And you're kind of like, that's not going to work. You have no direction. How are you going to tailor your message so that everybody wants what it is that you have? It doesn't work that way. That's why the niching is such an important lesson.
It is very much. And I do remember someone telling me that they were going to write a book on happiness a couple years ago. And I was like, who's your audience? And well, everybody needs to be happy. Right. Well, what you need is not only what you do in the first instance. And secondly, if you and I were to sit here and have a discussion about happiness, I would bet that your parameters for happiness are completely different than mine. So exactly. When you have something like that that's very subjective, you can't just say, well, everybody needs, because people actually have to be interested and invested in that as well. Recently, I had the honor of attending an event where I got to listen to a group of accountant bookkeepers who cater to the ministries. So I guess there's a whole different way of doing taxes for preachers and ministers. And I was just blown away that, wow, that's a whole industry. They have a big 7-figure business that they've built out of that. So it's crazy. Sometimes you're right. It is very counterintuitive. We want to serve everyone. So what is another lesson you've learned from talking to all of these podcasters or all of these guests?
Yes. So one of the one lesson that really caught me by surprise, because I've read a lot of these books, personal development books, personal growth books, listened to a lot of podcasts. The one thing that never really came up often, anyways, it may have, was the concept of budgeting your time. It might get, there's a couple of books out there. The One Thing's a big one where they talk about time blocking. So the importance of setting certain time aside and dedicating that to, your most important work. But they didn't even really get into the whole idea that maybe to begin with, what you should be doing is doing an assessment of where you're already spending your time. Kind of the idea. So my career back in the day was in financial planning. One of the first things I would suggest a client do is a financial budget. Let's look at where you're spending your money, and then we can help determine, is that a solid investment of your money, right? Whether it's expenditures that you've got here or there, it doesn't really matter. But it's kind of the same concept with time. Why not look at where you normally on an average week, we'll say, where are you investing your time and where are the opportunities that you can reallocate that time to something that's more important to you? And the reason I mentioned that being a little bit of a surprising lesson learned was I'd had multiple guests where one of the final questions I ask in every episode is, what's that one thing you would suggest the audience do and take action on to help them level up wherever they need it most? And I had multiple guests say, track time. And I was like, really? That's so interesting. And then as it started coming up more and more, and I'm like, there's got to be something to this. So I think just the act of tracking is there's value there because I did this with food. The act of tracking makes you more conscious of what you're actually doing. So if you do it with food, you're going to go, I have to write this down. I eventually have to write down that I ate half a pizza for dinner. Do I really want to write that down? Is that in line with my goals? Right? So it's kind of the same idea with tracking time. I think there's the value that in itself of just the act of knowing I'm going to have to write down that I spent 3.5 hours on a Saturday binge watching Netflix. Not that that's, if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do, but is it truly in line with the desired outcome that you say is important to you, whether it's building a business, getting financially independent, so that I can spend more time with my son and my wife, right? Like that's my big why. So does it make sense for me to want to sit down and spend 3.5 hours binge watching Netflix? Or should I maybe watch an hour with my wife and then the other 2.5 hours I invest elsewhere to something that's more important? That was a really interesting one that kind of caught me by surprise.
So all of you who watched Tiger King during the lockdown, it's time to reevaluate your entire life and how you're spending your time. And I was one of those people.
I personally didn't watch it, but with the one Netflix thing that's happening right now that I'm being tempted to binge watch, and I've restricted myself to maximum one episode when I do watch it, is the Chicago Bulls documentary, The Last Dance. I loved it because I remember Chicago Bulls kind of going through that dynasty era when I was younger. And so it's fun to rewatch it, but I tell myself I'm allowed maximum one episode if I'm going to watch it, which I usually watch it as a kind of like decompression right before I go to bed. On Tuesday nights, actually. It's even scheduled.
Well, good for you, because Tiger King was like, it was, excuse, my podcasting editor is going to be mad. It was such a shit show. You couldn't look away. You just couldn't look away. Like, are these people for real? So that's really great. And I'm going to even take that a step further. If you've ever read Brian Tracy's Eat That Frog, I do a lot of time management, and the first thing every morning, it's prospecting. That's it. Otherwise, it doesn't get done.
Yeah, I've not read it. I'm familiar with the book. It is actually on my to-read list, which is a very long list. I basically use Amazon's wish list. I just created a wish list, and it's books to read. And then every time I come across a book that sounds interesting or I want to eventually read, I throw it on that wish list. And what I'll do is I monitor the prices. I'll go in from time to time, and they'll list like, oh, this has dropped 75% since you added it to your wish list. And a lot of times, more than likely, they'll do a Kindle sale. They'll sell the ebook for, I was able to pick up a couple of the books I was wanting actually for 99 cents. You can't go wrong buying a book for 99 cents. I think most books, even at $20, $25, are a steal of a deal with the amount of value and knowledge that you can get out of them. So if you can get one for 99 cents, it's kind of a no-brainer at that point.
That's so funny. I'm an Audible listener, avid, because I run 5 days a week. So that's an hour, 5 hours I can listen to a book. And because I'm a publisher, I basically don't want to read anymore because I read all day. And sometimes it's not good reading. So what's another one of the lessons that you've learned from this?
So another one that came up quite regularly but was really interesting. It was never a very direct piece of advice, but it was a theme that came up quite regularly with all of the guests I interviewed. And it was more of like reinforcing a lot of the lessons learned in some of the great books out there, like Think and Grow Rich, As a Man Thinketh, things like that. But the power of the mind and how important it is to have a proper mindset, to positive thinking, gratitude, just the whole concept of how strong your thinking can influence your success, your ultimate success. And a lot of the coaches and entrepreneurs would maybe say it differently, but really what I'm trying to do as I go through this journey, and I'm even going all the way back to the beginning and re-listening, which has been an interesting thing for lesson as far as like my own development of being a podcast host, kind of going like, ooh, that was rough. But anyways, I'm sort of listening to myself as far as like, oh, okay, I need to improve here or there, blah, 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 whatever. But it's more, I'm trying to extract really what I want to find are like those core principles of success. And you can read a pile of books, you can talk to a lot of people, and you just all of a sudden you'll start seeing these common themes. And I really want to, for myself personally, and then maybe it's a book one day, but just boil them down to as simple as possible, of maybe it's 5, maybe it's 10, whatever it is, but what are those core foundational principles of success and thinking, as far as like, again, I don't know what you would call it, but just the mind itself is such a powerful tool, and learning how to leverage it and maximize that tool is going to lead to some great results for you.
Yeah, it definitely is. And for most people out there, when they're reading those books too, they skip over the exercises. If you don't take the action, you're never going to get where you want to be. It's interesting you talked about Think and Grow Rich, because I went through a period a while back where I just felt like I wasn't invigorated and I wasn't making, my business had kind of taken a dip, and I knew that I was part of it. And my coach had me read 4 chapters out of Think and Grow Rich. He had a particular 4 every single day for a month. And it was like by the end of the month, it was ingrained, but I found myself thinking like, what are you thinking that thought for? Wait a minute. No, you have to think this. So it's amazing when you go through an exercise like that, how you catch what you're thinking, that you may not even realize what you're thinking. So meta thinking basically is what that term is you're thinking about thinking. It's such a strange thing. It's so bizarre, but it really is just being very aware of the thoughts that you're having, and almost like analyzing them in a way, as far as like, oh, why did I just think that? Right. And then unpacking that a little bit. And it's a very interesting exercise. Hence why I think journaling is really important, because that to me, journaling is a way that you can kind of think about what you're thinking about. And then meditation also is great as far as kind of just calming the mind and more observing what you're potentially thinking about, because you can't stop the thoughts. They're going to pop in there. But when you're meditating, the idea being that you just kind of observe what you're thinking about, and you just kind of set it aside. Interesting. I don't do the journaling as much as I should, but meditation every morning and every night. So definitely something that everybody should do, because I don't know about you, but some of my best ideas come out of that. Yeah.
I definitely have some interesting ideas. I don't know if they're the best ones, but that was actually another one that does come up quite regularly. I don't emphasize that one as much as far as kind of like the lessons learned, because to me, you hear that everywhere now. Meditation is becoming more and more of a popular topic. If you listen to really any other podcast where they're talking to an audience of entrepreneurs, you're going to hear it over and over and over and over again, like meditate, meditate, meditate. All the most successful people in the world have some form of meditative practice.
That's so true. And I was actually at a luncheon on Thursday where I was talking to someone about our differences in how we meditate. So I just want to put that out there, you guys. If you think you can't do it, there's no way. There's like no standard way. He was talking about 20 minutes and, he does a clear one. I have one that I forget the name of it, but you go along with it. It's a guided meditation. So for me, the guided is better because I seriously have ADHD so bad. So last thing you've learned from all of this, all of these interviews.
The last one. Let's go with focus. There's a good one. You had mentioned ADHD. My wife and I refer to it as shiny object syndrome. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs tend to have some form of struggling with attention because entrepreneurs the way our minds work is different. We're always looking at the world and going, how can I solve problems, right? Mm-hmm. And there's obviously a lot of problems out there that require some solving. But if you don't put enough energy and focus behind any one of those particular ideas, it's not going to go anywhere. So a lot of the coaches and my guests and entrepreneurs would talk about the importance of training your focus. It's not something that you just have, likely not anyways, especially in our society today. The way media is consumed is it's very like bite-sized and instantaneous, and it's like drinking from a fire hose when you think about it, because you've got all the different social platforms. I don't watch TV for media or for news or any of that kind of stuff, because to be honest, I think if I were to, I would look at it and go, man, this is too slow. Because for me, I go to Twitter and I'm scrolling, I'm searching, I'm looking for my information there. Or if I go on Facebook and I'm kind of catch up on how people are doing in life, my friends and stuff like that. It's a bad habit. I admit that, but it's like I'm scanning and I'm trying to consume as much information as possible. And your mind just kind of starts going all over the place because there's so much of this input coming in that it's difficult to actually focus. So to train focus requires, an actual practice of, okay, for whatever it is, you start small. That's always the most important thing is, for 10 minutes, I'm exclusively focusing on whatever it is. And that's on all aspects of life. So being more focused on the time you're spending with your kids, your wife, your friends, your family, the work you're doing, the podcast interview that you're currently on, rather than, and I know a lot of people, I'm very guilty of this with my day job, is that if I'm on a video call where there's multiple people and I'm not required to be talking, I'll be sort of listening while trying to answer emails and do this task. And it's a terrible habit, but I'm not as engaged. And I think keeping that focus and training that focus is really what's going to help you refine those ideas that you have, because you'll be more focused on it. If you have focus with your business, that usually means you're focused on one thing and one thing exclusively. If you're in a relationship and you're talking to your significant other, you're focused on them instead of trying to talk to them while responding to the notifications that are on your phone. So focus as a broad sense was something that's come up many, many times, not just in the case of the value there for business, but the value in all aspects of life is to just train yourself in a practice of being more focused and present with whatever it is that you're doing.
It's very, very true. It's funny you should say that about life going slow, because I hang out with a group of Audible listeners and we all listen on 1.75.
I listen to some podcasts, depending on who it is, at times too.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, all right, give me the goods. Give me the goods.
Give me the goods. But it's also when you start having present conversations with people, it's like, just give birth. Like, you're not talking fast enough.
Yeah. It's, I don't know if it's like a good habit, a bad habit. For me, depending what the podcast is, I'll actually go to one speed. And it takes me a while to like almost get used to it, because my initial reaction is like, oh, you're talking so slow, but it's normal speed, right? 1.5 is kind of more my common, where I feel like it's a good pace, but if it's content that I'm a little bit more familiar with and I'm almost just looking for the golden nuggets and that's it, then I go to ×2. I've actually gone through some content at ×3.
Oh my gosh.
×3 would be because I've listened to it before and I'm re-listening to it. So I'll do it at ×3.
I only do ×2 when it's something I don't want to do, but I have to. So it's my get it out of the way. So Chris, where can we find you? Where's your podcast?
Great question. The best place to find me would be GetCoached360 I've got all the social platforms listed there. And then I've even included my personal social connections on there as well. So if you want to follow me personally, you can find all that information at the website, which is GetCoached360podcast.com.
Great. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Juliet. It was a pleasure.